Hey everybody, Lee with LG Speed and Custom, and in this video, we're mounting shocks on my 1932 Ford. So before we get into this, I just want to point out, we've got a couple new shirt designs, including this one of the car that we should be working on today, my 1947 Ford sedan. The reason I say we should be working on it is it's currently broken. It's got no third gear. You go from second into third and nothing's happening. So I think it's like the shift fork inside the transmission, something got a little weird with it. It still drives fine in first and second, as long as you don't want to go fast. But yeah, we should be working on that, but we're not. So this is one of the new shirt designs done by Christian Head of Headlines Pinstriping. So yeah, if you want one of these, go to lgspeedcustom.com and get yourself one. So on to the 32 now. I've kind of been ignoring this car for a little bit because Shannon's Comet was this close to being done, and now it's done. It's on the road. She's been driving it. She drove it to work all week. Got all the 99% of the bugs worked out, and she's quite happy with it. So we're gonna go back on this now. In the last video that we did on this, we had got the rear suspension styled in where we want it to be for as far as the wheelbase goes. We were discussing fenders versus no fenders, and fenders is what this car is gonna have. I know a lot of people want fenderless, but I've already got a couple fenderless cars, so let's do a full fendered car. We got to build some mounts. We've got these bump stops here that were in my bolt bin. I think these came off my friend Zach's 55 Chevy truck. So we're going to reuse these on the back. We'll build some mounts for that, and then build some shock mounts. So the back will probably just fabricate our own shock mounts. In the front, we've got some F1 shock mounts, so we'll get into that, and I'll show you how to manipulate them to make them work on an early Ford frame. So let's get into it. Another thing in the last video that we determined was our ride height. Because we are running full fenders, this car can only sit so low before the tires will rub on the fenders. And just by the way it worked out, the height that it's currently sitting at right now is where this needs to be like bottomed out at. It cannot sit any lower than that. Obviously, we're gonna have to raise it up, put a spring spacer or something in. That's not a huge deal. But before we do that, we're gonna take advantage of this particular natural height it's sitting at, because we can build our bump stop brackets to fit here. Not only that, but when we go to build our shock mounts, we can take the shock and compress it all the way down and just build our brackets so that the shock, when it's compressed, fits to this particular suspension height. That way, when we raise the suspension up to the height that it needs to be for adequate driving, we know that when it bottoms out, it's gonna bottom out on the bump stops, and the shocks will be at the bottom of their stroke before the tires hit the fenders. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. It makes sense to me, so. First thing we're gonna do is build some little tabs to weld to the frame to hold this bump stop. Probably just take some, I don't know, 3/16 plate and make this exact same design so that the bump stop bolts to it. We'll fit it in place and then run a weld on each side. Should be pretty easy. We'll go draw this up on Fusion 360 and then cut it out on the plasma table. Hold on a moment. While filming that last shot you guys just saw, I had a way easier, more simple idea. Instead of mounting it like this, if I turn it sideways like that, take this bolt out, look at that. So now I just got to drill one hole through there. That is so much easier than making a bracket and welding the bracket. Less welding, less fabricating, I just got to drill one hole. That's it. So let's do that. That's way easier. Let me go find a drill. So much better. You know, I've been looking at this for 3 weeks. 3 weeks I've been walking by this thing every day, looking at these, planning how I'm gonna do it. Thought I had the best idea ever, and then, wow, this is just, oh. Okay, maybe it's not so easy. But you know what? We can just leave it like this for now. And then when we take this thing apart for paint, which is the next step once we get the shocks done, we can just drill that second hole and all this isn't in the way. Okay, I'm gonna bolt this in on that side, and then we'll build some shock mounts. So here's what I've come up with. First of all, I took the shock and I wrapped a zip tie around it to compress it as short as it would go. I then took this bolt out that used to be that long and put a longer one in, as well as I pressed a sleeve in this lower shock mount so that it's got something to squeeze on, and just use this bolt as our lower shock mount. I think that should work fine. For the top, we've got this bolt here. Now, I was thinking, like, I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with like 60s and 70s Ford trucks, but they got this bracket that comes off up like that, and I started designing something like that. Had it all drawn up on the computer. And then my pal Jim walks in and he's all like, oh yeah, you're just gonna put a plate across there with a hole in it? I was like, well, I guess I am now, because that's way easier. So I've drawn up a little template here, and this will basically weld in like that, and then we'll drill a hole for that to go through. We'll have to put where my thumb is here, we'll have to put a little spacer. That's no big deal, a little 1-inch spacer or something. And we'll weld that in. The reason I like this better than my plan was gonna have a bracket that welded on here, came up, across, and then down with a hole in it. And if I ever decided to change this, you know, it'd be a lot of work to cut that bracket out if it didn't end up working. So with this setup here, like that, I just got a zing, zing, and if we change our mind down the road, it's no big deal to take that out. So now I'm gonna make this, probably out of 3/16 plate. I think that should be heavy enough for what we're doing. That should fit kind of just like that. And then this bolt will go through. I'm going to take it a step further, and I'm going to weld a 1/2-inch nut to the back side here. That way when we're changing shocks, we don't have to fuss about getting the wrench back there. And hopefully it doesn't seize and break and start spinning off in 20 years down the road. That'll be a future lead problem. Before I weld these nuts to the backside, I'm just gonna put some little bolts through here, and that does two things. One, it holds the nut in place while you're welding it, and the second thing it does, sometimes when you're welding nuts and stuff, the threads can get a little bit distorted. So this way, by doing it this way, after we weld it, when we take this out, it kind of cleans the threads up at the same time. Both those guys are ready. Hot, hot, hot. Okay, I'm gonna let those cool down and go have some lunch, because I'm hungry. I think that should work pretty good. That concludes the back area. We got 2 bump stops and 2 shocks. Now when we put a spacer, I'm thinking probably, remember I put this reverse eye leaf in here? I think we could probably take that out, put a standard eye leaf back in. That'll raise us up an inch. And then maybe put a 2-inch block in there. That'll raise it up 3 inches from where it's at. We'll start with that, and we can always kind of fine tune it from there. If you're curious as to what kind of shocks these are Monroe 5752 shocks, which are from a 1949 Plymouth. Apparently, Pete and Jake's based their shocks off of these ones here. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. That's just folklore amongst the internet. But, I mean, I don't know if they do or not. They work nice. They're a really short shock. Let's move on to the front. To start with the front shocks, we need to go on an adventure way up there. 3 stories high. I've got a shelf with all my swap meet hot rod parts on it. So grab a lunch, we're going up 3 flights of stairs. Welcome to the parts attic. This is where all my junk is stored. So if we go on this shelf right about here, that was easy. We've got some swap meet special F1 shock mounts. So let's take these back downstairs and fit them into the car. Well, I've been sitting here for, I don't know, an hour or so, drinking black coffee, looking at this thing, and I think I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I should probably wait until I have the fender brackets, because they bolt on here, and I know they're going to come up on an angle. And I should probably mount those before I start mounting this upper shock mount. I've got a couple ideas that I think will work pretty good for shocks, but let's hold off on that. In the meantime, there's still 10,000 other things that we can do on this. So let's do those instead. So we should probably tackle this Firewall next, I guess. When it comes to body and paint, shiny paint jobs, fancy paint jobs, they don't really do nothing for me. I could care less. I am quite content to have a car that's in original paint or patina or rattle can. Doesn't matter to me at all. But one thing I do like, I like a nice interior, especially the dash. Love having a beautiful dash to look at. So I always spend the time and I'll restore the dash. I mean, when you're sitting in the car driving, that's what you're looking at. I like a nice seat, and I really like a nice firewall. So that's why the Firewall and the dashboard are the only two pieces of the body that I've had sandblasted so far, because they're the only ones I kind of care about right now. This Firewall it's not bad, but it's not great. It's got a lot of broken screws in it. It doesn't really have any extra unnecessary holes in it, which is a good thing. It's got a tear in it, so probably unbolt it from the car. We'll put it on a stand, and I don't know, I guess we'll start with the broken screws and fixing the tear and kind of going from there. It is heavily, heavily pitted. I don't know if you guys remember a few videos back when I went to strip the paint off it before it went to the sandblasters just to save a little bit of time sandblasting. I thought this was sprayed with like box liner or undercoating or something like that, but it's not. It's just that's how pitted it is. So once we're done a little bit of metal work on it, it's probably going to need a few coats of slick sand and a few hours block sanding, which will be fun. Anyways, I guess we'll unbolt it. Oh, this is just sludge in the bottom of this. Yeah. Good morning. It's Saturday, bright and early. Not really, it's like 10. We're gonna jump into this Firewall now. So yesterday, before I called it quits for the day, I looked at some pictures of some original Firewalls and figured out what holes are factory and what are not factory. And then I thought about it and decided what holes I want to keep and what holes I don't want to keep, because I know some, like, even though they're factory holes, they're not relevant to what we're doing at all, and we're not doing a restoration. We're building a hot rod, so we don't need them. Holes like, there's these 4 holes right here. That was for, I think, the 4-cylinder 32 Fords had like a little rubber bushing thing, or not a bushing, I think like a motor mount or something. Not a motor, I don't know what it is, but there was a piece that bolted on there for the 4-cylinder engine, so we don't need those holes, I don't think. These ones here had like the wiring harness from the factory wires came out of there, so we'll probably, I don't know if we need all of them, but we'll keep some of them because we're gonna have wires coming through. These 3 dimpled ones we need, that's for the dash tunnel, we got to keep those. These ones all around here, I'm still humming and hawing on. They are for the Firewall pad that goes on the back side, and it has little metal clips that poke through there. I don't know if I'm going to use the Firewall pad, the factory one, because, I mean, the whole second floor up here is an upholstery shop, so we can just make our own and glue it rather than having those little clips. It'll just make for like a little smoother Firewall. One thing I don't want is I don't want this Firewall to start looking like an aftermarket street rod Firewall. I want it to still look like an original Ford Firewall. So I might keep them, I might not, I probably won't. I've marked out here, the back of the block just tickles this a little bit. I don't know if it's rubbing or not, but I think it might, when the car's all together and the engine's running, it might vibrate every now and then. So I'll probably massage this a little bit. Somebody already has a bit with a hammer that is a little bit crude, so I think we can do a little bit better job than that. We only need, it's only got to go back like, you know, 1/8 of an inch would be more than enough. Yeah, some tears down here. We're gonna straighten those back out, weld those up. The gas pedal, my friend Matt donated a 34 Ford gas pedal, which is almost the same as the 32 gas pedal, except for it's a fraction of the price. So we'll look into this. Someone's cobbled this out a little bit. When we took this car apart, it had, I don't know, like a 60s or 70s GM pedal with a cable poking through there. So we're probably not going to use that again, so we can clean this up and make that 34 pedal work. So yeah, other than that, let's get into it. Probably start with the holes first, because it's easy, and I like to start off easy. To weld this up, I'm just using the MIG, nice and easy. I'm also using some brass. Now, I don't know, I'm sure everybody knows about the brass trick. I mean, it's step one in, learning how to weld sheet metal. But for those that don't, brass, weld does not stick to brass. So if you're filling a hole, for example, this hole right here, if you take the piece of brass and hold it on the backside like that, you can just blast the weld in there, fill that hole right up, and pull it back. And that does two things. One, the brass absorbs some of the heat, which is a good thing, but mainly what it does is stops from, like, you don't have to, weld around the edge and then slowly build the thing up. You can just blast her right in there, and it works really nice. Grind the top off, you're done. The other thing I have is a little bit of compressed air. So after I weld this hole up and pull the brass off, I can blast some air on the weld until it's nice and cold. That will kind of minimize the shrinkage a bit and the warping. When you're welding sheet metal, and everyone's always concerned about it warping, the reason it warps is because the heat from the weld causes the metal to actually shrink. That's one reason why gas welding or TIG welding sheet metal is kind of the preferred method, is because the weld stays nice and malleable so you can hammer it out after you weld it. When you weld, it shrinks. When you hammer and dolly metal and you hear that tink, 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 that's the metal actually stretching back out. So when it gets all shrunk from the weld, you just take the hammer and dolly and stretch it back out to where it's supposed to be. So MIG welding, you can't really do that as much because the MIG weld it's a little more hard and brittle compared to a TIG weld. So you can't really hit it with a hammer and dolly too many times or it'll start to crack. But for these little holes, and this firewall is thick enough that I think we'll be just fine. It'll be okay. We're not going for a concourse Pebble Beach restoration either. This is just a dirty old hot rod, so it'll be fine for that. I'll switch to time lapse and start welding up. We've got all the holes welded up that I don't want to use anymore. I kept these two big guys here. I was thinking, temperature sender is going to come through one, probably oil pressure on the other. We got one hole here for a wiring harness, one hole here for another part of the wiring harness, or who knows. I don't know, we'll figure that part out when we're wiring the car. But we've got 4 holes remaining. The rest of the holes are all welded up. This hole I did have circled to weld up, but I decided to try the gas pedal first, and we need that hole for the gas pedal, so it stayed. This little guy goes right here. I welded up these cracks, or it wasn't cracks, somebody sliced that open. I think they folded it up to get a different pedal to go through there, so I've welded those up, and our next task now is to get these broken bolts out, which is going to be a bit of a challenge. I think the best way to go about that, let me flip this over here. On the back side here, let me get the camera zoomed in so you can see a little better. How's that? You can see what's up now, right? So on the back side here, we have little bits of the bolt still sticking through. So for our first attempt, I'm going to take these 1/4-inch nuts, put them on there, and then weld the nuts to the stud. I think I'll use the TIG torch for that, because then I can really get the heat going in there without getting a lot of fill. because we don't want to weld on top of it. We just want to weld the nut to this stud, and by letting the heat slowly go in there, it will heat this up so that hopefully they thread right out. If they don't thread right out, if this turns out to be a giant can of worms disaster, we can just cut them right out. These are just like pressed. I don't know if they're spot welded or pressed or what, but they're a separate piece from the firewall. So we can just grind these out and put, you know, weld some nuts on the backside of the holes. We'll consider that a plan B. I'd like to reuse these studs if I can. Okay, we'll weld those in. All right, let's see what happens here. TIG welders generally don't like galvanized nuts, and they don't really like old sandblasted metal that much either. So it's probably gonna make a mess, but that's fine, as long as it comes out. Oh yeah, she's popping. There's one. And two. All right, let's grab a wrench or a little socket and see if these will budge. They're either gonna budge or just break right off. That feels promising. There's one, came right out like butter. Oh yeah. Perfect. All right, well that was really easy. I guess the next step now is we'll just flip the firewall back over and start grinding some of these welds up. When I grind welds on sheet metal, you'd think I would start with that, but I don't. I actually finish with that, and I start with this. This is just a little zip disc, little 3-inch cutting wheel, and this might seem like a weird thing to grind with, but they work really, really nice. What I do is I want to hold it like this, right on top of the weld. And what I do with this is, you know, say the weld is like this. You start on top and you grind it down until you're only touching the weld. You're not touching any of the firewall or the flat sheet at all. You're just grinding the weld. And you grind that down until it's 90% gone. So you come down 90%, so there's only 10% of the weld left on the plane. Then you switch to this, and you do the last 10% with this. And that does two things. One, your box of grinding discs, which are expensive, these discs are not cheap, your box of grinding discs will last way longer. And two, by doing this, you can focus more on the weld, because I mean, you don't want to grind the firewall at all. You just want to grind the weld. This sometimes, especially when you're getting close near the end, as you're grinding the weld, it'll be touching the firewall in a couple other spots. Not all the time. I mean, some people are really good. They've got lots of control, but it's pretty common to touch the firewall. And what happens with that is as you're grinding your weld, and there's a spot over here that's grinding on the firewall at the same time, you're gonna grind that spot too thin. So this will prevent that. This does need a little bit of, you can't get super carried away with this. If you go a little bit too far, obviously you're gonna have grinder or like little marks in there that you can't get out. So I mean, a lot of it takes some practice, but that's how I do it. I start with this, go 90%, and then finish with that. I think we're going to open the door because it is beautiful out. And it's pretty cool that I can open the door in January and work. So we'll do that, and then we'll do some grinding here. Oh yeah. Look at that sunshine. This is amazing. I love it. Got the 47 airing out. It rained pretty hard last week and it was a little bit damp inside. So it's been sitting in the sun all morning with the doors open, getting all nice and fresh. Let's grind. Put your earmuffs on. This is going to get loud. John's here. Roadster weather. Well, John's left, and then John McKay came by, and he's left. So now that all the Johns are gone, we can get back to working on this thing. Took that down 90% with the zip disc like you saw. Now we've got a 36 grit disc on the little 90 degree here, and we're going to take it the final 10%. Once again, you want to focus mostly on the weld and not so much on the material around it, because you don't want to make it too thin. That turned out pretty good. Remember what this used to look like? This was just split and folded that way and just a huge goobered mess, and it is pretty nice. Obviously, we can't metal finish this because it is so badly pitted. So we'll do our best and fill the rest. Well, it's, once all the metal work is done on this, we'll spray it in some polyester surfacer, some slick sand, which is basically spray-on body filler, and that'll fill all these little pits and imperfections. The next thing we're going to tackle now is this little spot right here. You can see somebody went to town with a sledgehammer or something to clearance that a little bit. We're going to take it a little bit further and use old Smashy here, the plenishing hammer, to just make a little bit nicer of a job out of it. This is a vintage 1940s water volette plenishing hammer. It has all sorts of different dies. This is a number 3 radius. So different dies to give you different curves and stuff. The cool thing with a water volette plenishing hammer is this frame, if you take these hose clamps off, this whole frame becomes portable, and then you can take it over to the car that you're working on. I also have a smaller frame, and when you bought these way back 1,000 years ago, they actually came with a bigger frame as well. I'm missing that one, but You know, I've had this for 15 years now, and there's only been one time where I actually needed that bigger frame. So, all right, we're gonna throw that guy in here. Put your earmuffs on for that, because this thing, she's a shaker. All right, let's plug this guy in. I took a little bit of transmission fluid mixed with paint thinner and sprayed it on there just to give it a little bit of lubrication. Let's flip this guy in there. Ready? Here we go. Well, that made really quick work of that. Let's give it a little rinse here, and we'll test fit it on the car and see how it fits. I think it'll be okay. It moved a lot. Before I could, with the firewall sitting in place, I could slide a piece of paper through there, which isn't a lot of clearance. I don't think, at least. Okay, that bolts in. Let's try this side. It should sit about there, and oh, it's hitting. Still hitting. So we gotta go a little bit more, kind of in this area, right down in the very bottom. There we go. We got tons of clearance now. Can just about slide my fingers through there. That should work. Well, that fits really nice. Considerably better than it did. I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, this is probably 12.5 better than it used to be. I think that's gonna end this video. I've had enough for today. I'm tired. We got quite a bit done. We got our bump stops done. We got our rear shocks figured out. Front shocks we started on, but we took a pause on those until we get the fender braces. Firewall we've got pretty much roughed in. There's got to do a little bit of work on the feet down here. There's a couple little chunks broken off, so we got to fix those up. But we'll do that another day. I want to thank everybody for watching. As always, make sure to check out the website, lgspeedcustom.com, for some hot rod shirts, LG Speed and Custom shirts and stickers or parts. Andy G just dropped by the website. I got his order like an hour ago he picked himself up 12 of our universal shock tabs for his Model T that he's building. Go check out Andy G's Garage on YouTube. A good friend of mine, he's building a Model T Roadster, like late 50s style. It's gonna be a pretty cool car. So anyways, that's it for this video, and we'll talk to you later.